the major bottleneck for Ethereum for scaling the L1 is the validators.
Justin is a researcher on the protocol architecture team at the Ethereum Foundation.
One of my contributions was to suggest using BLS signatures, which are these aggregatable signatures. And today, Ethereum has more than 1 million validators. Most people would be shocked if they were to hear this number for the first time, but it costs about 1 cent to prove a whole Ethereum block. My personal prediction is that within the next 10 years, China or some other entity will be 51% attacking Bitcoin.
When do you think quantum computers can break algorithms like ECPSA?
It's reasonable that within the next 10 years, let's say, that having a blockchain which is so secure that nothing can break it, not a nation state, not a quantum computer, that is at least the dream that we have.
Welcome everyone to the Web3 Security Podcast. Today we have Justin Drake with us, which I'm very excited about. Justin is a researcher on the protocol architecture team at the Ethereum Foundation. If you're not familiar with the Ethereum Foundation or Ethereum, one of the biggest blockchains in the world, roughly $500 billion in market cap for the Ether token, and has about $200 billion in funds locked in DeFi. So an absolute, monster in terms of the space. And it's great to have you with us today, Justin.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jack. And the number that I have in mind actually is that Ethereum secures $1 trillion. So $500 billion for ETH for the asset and another $500 billion for all of the other assets. And just recently, we crossed $100 billion of Tether alone. Wow.
That's impressive. And I mean, how do you count L2s? How do you count L1s that use the same, stack as you? There's a lot being secured.
I count all of the assets that are on the L1, so not the alt L1s, and that includes the L2s because you have to make deposits through the L1, unless it's natively minted on the L2, in which case I would probably count it as part of Ethereum as well.
Yeah, cool. Makes sense. Well, great. Yeah, I would love to, start with your background and kind of, take us back into the early days. How did you first get into computers? Where did you grow up? That kind of thing.
Sure. So I grew up in France up to the age of 14. And the way that I got into computers was through my mom. So when I must have been 8 or so, we received a computer as a Christmas present. It was a massive a desktop, with one of these very big towers and these really heavy screens, and the keyboard making lots of noise. And my mom was a web developer back then, kind of on the side, kind of trying to make money on the side. And she had a few kind of basic programming books and web development books, and I just was curious and picked them up, and that's how I got into it. And I spent a lot of time gaming. Age of Empires 2 was one of my favorite games.
That's one of my favorites too.
And I also got my own book. So when I was 12 or 13, I got a C programming book, which was like really thick. And I didn't understand, most of it, to be quite honest. But, I felt that there was something there that I needed to understand. Yeah, eventually I learned JavaScript. And then around the age of maybe 14 or so, I just kind of gave up on computers and went into mathematics. I went to the US for summer camps called Math Camp. Those were 5-week summer camps for young teenagers. And I absolutely adored it. And then I ended up studying mathematics at Cambridge for 4 years. I did my undergrad and master's there. And then when I graduated, I applied to various PhD positions in mathematics, and I got rejected everywhere, which was, I think, one of the best things that could have happened to me in my life, because that kind of forced me to look at other things. And very, very quickly, I found this consultancy, which was based in Cambridge, and they were basically in electronics and FPGA programming, and this is where I met Dankrad. So we were working on the same project, doing low latency FPGA programming for exchanges, and he got me into Bitcoin in 2013. And shortly after that, so Dankrad of Dank Sharding fame. Shortly after that, we bought a Bitcoin ATM together, where we were basically selling Bitcoin for British pound notes. So you'd enter the British pound notes in the machine, you scan your QR code, and we would send you the Bitcoin. And in December 2013, I created the Cambridge Bitcoin meetup group because I was just so eager to learn. And then in 2014 or 15, I decided, okay, I want to do this full time. I'm just so hooked on Bitcoin. I was doing it nights and weekends. And so I found this opportunity with a London investment firm called Anthemis, where they're providing a small stipend, something like £15,000 for a whole year. And I got the freedom to dive full time into Bitcoin. And during that time, I founded a company, which was a Bitcoin startup. What we eventually ended up doing was building a front end for a peer-to-peer marketplace called OpenBazaar. So that's a decentralized peer-to-peer marketplace built on top of Bitcoin. Way too early, especially built on top of Bitcoin, maybe 20 years too early. And I got a little bit frustrated by some of the maintainers of OpenBazaar because they were all Bitcoin maxis. And when Ethereum came out in 2015, I was like, hey, maybe we should go have a look at Ethereum because they have the programmability that we need to actually build a marketplace. And they were like, no. Let's build everything on top of Bitcoin. 2 out of 3 multi-sig is enough. When OpenBazaar and my company ended up doing not so well, I kind of had this itch to scratch to learn more about Ethereum. So I watched a bunch of talks, learning as much as I could. I found a talk by Vitalik where he described an open problem called the data availability problem. So I decided to spend a few weeks thinking about it, and I emailed him some ideas. And a few weeks after that, after kind of this email conversation that we had, he hired me at Ethereum Foundation, and that was in 2017. So a long time ago. Going back to the very early days, like I still remember our first internet connection provider was AOL, and we were running these 56K modems that go. That's how old I am, and I guess in the context of blockchains, I feel very old now. It is what it is. But I do want to say that it's still early days in the grand scheme of things. And I remember vividly when I joined the Ethereum Foundation in 2017, thinking that I was extremely late, right? Like the project had already been launched. It was already worth, close to $10 billion. And I was like, I'll make a small contribution, but actually ended up discovering that there was a ton of low-hanging fruit and a lot of opportunity for researchers to come in.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's a super cool journey, super interesting. I guess we can kind of pick it up. So you joined Ethereum 2017. You were working on one of the open problems that Vitalik put out there. Where did you go from there? Did you spend time on the data availability problem for a while? Did you move into other areas?
Yeah, so I spent a bit of time on the data availability problem. I ended up, the approach that I was trying to take ended up being a flawed approach. So I was trying to solve it purely with cryptography. And it turned out that there's an impossibility result. So you can prove that data availability cannot be solved with pure cryptography. And that was actually a nice result because it meant that I could focus on other things. And I knew that this was a dead end. I spent a bit of time studying sharding. We actually started writing the specs for sharding. And back then, there was proof of stake and sharding as 2 independent efforts. And then at one point, we kind of merged these efforts. And once we merged these efforts, we called the merge project the beacon chain. And one of the big technical challenges there was called signature aggregation. So we wanted to have many, many validators, tens, hundreds of thousands, maybe even a million validators. And how do we make sure that the consensus participants, which are running on weak devices, can verify so many signatures in small amounts of time? And one of my contributions was to suggest using BLS signatures, which are these aggregatable signatures, and that ended up being a massive success. And today, Ethereum has more than 1 million validators. So every epoch, every 6.4 minutes, we aggregate 1 million signatures, which is kind of mind blowing. I've done all sorts of research in different directions. I spent a bunch of time in the economic side of things. So trying to understand MEV, one that was kind of still nascent, trying to understand how we can protect ourselves against MEV. So there were ideas like proposer builder separation, PBS, other kind of more radical ideas that I think are more appropriate, called attester proposer separation. Basically, the idea here is to try and contain the negative impact of MEV to sophisticated actors away from the unsophisticated consensus participants that we want to be as unsophisticated and as decentralized as possible. I studied things like MEV burn, like how can we harness MEV and capture some of for the L1 to capture some of the value. I spent a bunch of time looking in macroeconomics as well, issuance curves and issuance versus burn dynamics. And there was a whole period of time where I was a big advocate of the ultrasound money meme, with the supply of ETH going down when the burn was greater than issuance. And in recent times, I've been mostly focusing on two big projects, kind of returning to cryptography. One has been trying to scale the L1 quite radically with ZK-EVMs. And the other project is a post-quantum security project for the consensus layer. And both of them are making use of SNARKs, which is this amazingly powerful technology that complements the two other cryptographic primitives that we use in blockchains, namely hash functions and signature schemes. And I think, when you have these SNARKs, it's kind of the trifecta of cryptographic schemes that allows you to basically solve all of the problems that we have at L1.
Yeah. I've seen you talk a little bit about that. Kind of the dilemma or trilemma is less. It's solvable now. It's less of a constraint, I guess. You don't have to trade off. I think you've kind of called some of it. You have beast mode, which you've talked about in I think it was in your Lean Ethereum article, and that's talking about these ZK-EVMs. How would you introduce people to, what is beast mode? What is, why are we using ZK-EVMs in Ethereum now? What's the high level?
Right. So one of the goals of consensus is to ensure that the blockchain is valid, meaning it's made out of valid transactions and valid blocks. And the technology that we've had for the last 15 years has been extremely primitive, which is that we're going to ask every single consensus participant to redundantly verify every single transaction, which is, in some sense, kind of dumb. It's kind of like Stone Age technology. And we now have this much more powerful technology called SNARKs that allows one single person to produce a proof that everyone else can verify instantly, like basically for free. And so now the consensus participants can run on extremely weak devices, and we can have essentially arbitrarily many transactions go through the blockchain, and the validity of those transactions can still be checked essentially for free. And right now, the major bottleneck for Ethereum for scaling the L1 is the validators. And the main reason is that we are so constrained on the power of the validators. Right? We want the validators to be, the meme is that we want them to be running on Raspberry Pis. We want them to be running on weak devices, think an old laptop. And this is very, very different to a project like Solana, where you need an expensive server in the data center. And the good news is that we can resolve the trade-off between scale and decentralization with these snarks. And only just now has the technology matured enough that we can think of incorporating it at L1. And I'd say there's two key technical challenges that need to be solved, both of which are basically being solved as we speak. The first one is making sure that the latency is of producing these proofs is short enough. So when a block is produced, you want the proof to arrive for this block before the next block arrives, so that the attesters, the consensus participants, can vote and say, hey, yes, indeed, this is a valid block. So we talk about real-time proving, basically proving which is as fast as the blockchain progresses, where the proof latency is less than 1 Ethereum slot, less than 12 seconds. And then the other constraint that we have is what we call on-prem proving, where we want the proving to be reasonably accessible. We don't want to be dependent on clouds for proving. And the nice thing about proving is that it's a 1 out of n assumption, meaning that you only need one single actor in the world to produce the proof, as opposed to consensus, which usually requires at least half of the consensus participants to be honest. So it's much easier to satisfy the 1 of n, but we still want n to be large. And if you look around the world, there's about 100 data center operators, and so n equals 100 is not super satisfactory. We want n to be in the many thousands, if not millions. And one of the realizations is that with electric cars, many people have access to roughly 10 kilowatts of energy in their homes, or in their garage, or in their offices. And so we're hoping to have the whole real-time proving hardware be contained within this 10 kilowatts power envelope, which is the main limitation factor. And at DevConnect for eProofs Day, I'll be doing a demo where I'm going to shut down my execution layer client, Geth, and I'll be running only my consensus layer client, verifying ZK-EVM proofs. And we're going to have multiple proofs generated by these provers that run on clusters that consume less than 10 kilowatts.
Yeah. Awesome. That sounds really, really exciting. And so, fundamentally, this is kind of a security issue, right? Like why you want N to be so large.
Yeah, exactly. It's a liveness issue. So the worst case scenario is that all of the governments somehow band up together and tell the data center operators, don't do Ethereum proving anymore. And then what will happen is that the throughput of Ethereum would degrade to the next best thing available. And so we would have a liveness degradation where we'd go from, I don't know, X megagas per second to something significantly lower. And what we want is basically if we're going to provide a certain amount of throughput, we want that to be guaranteed. And if anything kind of fishy happens where like Europe says, no more Ethereum proving, while some guy in some random country in their mother's basement can do the proving for all of Ethereum if they so want to.
Yeah, makes sense. It's super interesting. And so in terms of, I guess, the ZK-VM companies who are helping to kind of solve one or both of these issues. So one is getting it in under 12 seconds, getting it done in under 12 seconds. The other is making it have a low power and storage requirement, potentially. How does the Ethereum Foundation plan to kind of interact with these ZK-VM companies?
Right. So we have this effort called eProofs. So it's a website available at eProofs.org. And it basically invites all of these external ZK-VM teams to submit proofs of Ethereum blocks. And that has been a wonderfully successful endeavor. So now we basically have real world benchmarks and real world numbers on the latencies, but also the cost to generate these proofs. And I think most people would be shocked if they were to hear this number for the first time, but it costs about 1 cent to prove a whole Ethereum block. So it's almost free. And you can think of an Ethereum block as having roughly 100 transactions. So per transaction, it's 100th of a cent to prove a transaction. And as part of this ETH proof effort, the Ethereum Foundation has communicated and coordinated with all of those teams. We have this tracker, I guess you could include it in the show notes, where we have a list of something like 35 ZK-EVMs. We're trying to track, for example, are they open source? What type of ISA they're using, which is a technical detail of how they're built. Are they aiming for real-time proving? Have they been integrated with ETH proofs? All of this information. And slowly, all of the cells are becoming green. And the green cell is basically means appropriate for Ethereum L1. And so now we have about, of those 35, we have, I guess, a short list of 9 that are trying to become ZK-EVMs that would be used for L1 proving. Now, what I expect will happen in practice is that the validators would have 5 proof systems and require something like 3 of them in order to consider a block valid. So it would be a 3 out of 5 system. Potentially, those parameters could change a little bit. But we're reaching the final phases, and I'm hopeful that in 2026, a reasonably significant fraction of the validators will be running these ZK-EVM verifiers, and then in 2027 we can have this upgrade called mandatory proofs, which basically says that every proof needs to be accompanied by every block needs to be accompanied by ZK-EVM proofs, and all of the validators need to be verifying that there's sufficiently many of these proofs in order for them to attest on it. And from that point onwards, everyone can just basically run statelessly, meaning that they don't need a hard drive anymore to store the Ethereum state. They can just verify these proofs. They don't need to have a laptop. They can have a Raspberry Pi or even something weaker like a mobile phone. And they don't need large amounts of RAM, and they don't need fast disk I/O. So they don't need an NVMe drive, which is a type of SSD which has high throughput. At that point, not only will we have improved the decentralization of the validators, but maybe more importantly, we will have the foundations to grow the gas limit as fast as we can. And then we're going to start hitting various bottlenecks that are outside of the validators. So, for example, we want to make sure that the block explorers have enough capacity to not just fall apart. We want to make sure that the mempool is sufficiently well optimized so that everyone can gossip their transactions. We want to make sure that the block builders and the relays and the searchers, all of this is off-chain infrastructure is sufficiently robust. What I expect will happen is that over a period of a few years, we would increase the throughput by at least 100x. What I'm hoping will happen is that we'll increase it by 500x. Why 500x? Because at that point, we will reach 1 gigagas per second target. So on average, Ethereum transactions consume about 100,000 gas. So that's the equivalent, roughly speaking, of 5 simple transfers. So think of a DEX transaction. And 1 gigagas per second is the equivalent of 10,000 TPS. And just for comparison, Solana, which is kind of known to be the scalability chain, on a typical moment, they're doing less than 1,000 user transactions per second. So it would be 10 times more than Solana. And I believe that we can get there and also have far superior decentralization than we even have today.
Yeah. I mean, it's a super exciting vision. So you think this can be done by 2027, Validator kind of running it?
Yeah. And for the gas increase, what I'm hoping we can do is increase it 3x per year. And so when you compound this 3x per year over a period of 6 years, you get the 500x that we need. But even after like 3-4 years, we'll have an extremely high gas limit, and I'm hopeful that for at some point, basically, there will be like more supply than there is demand, and Ethereum will be in a position where it can absorb all of the new entrepreneurs that come into the space.
Yeah. Awesome. In terms of, what do you see as the maybe security risks around this roadmap? ZK in general, people have called it moon math. It's fairly complex. Do you think that's an area that you worry about in terms of, these 9 companies are each going to have their own implementation? There's probably going to be some bugs in it. How do you think about it?
Yeah, so the good news is that from a security standpoint, we have a strategy that we've already executed on, which is basically a very similar strategy to what we have for the consensus layer clients and the execution layer clients. So if you go to the website clientdiversity.org, you'll see that for each of the consensus and execution layer, we have at least 5 different clients. And this is why I think it would be nice to have at least 5 different ZK-EVM proofs. And the assumption with these pieces of complex software is that they're all buggy in like their own unique ways. Like they all have at least one bug. And the good news is that when you look at them as a set, there's actually a lot of robustness. And this is what we've seen in the 10-year history of Ethereum, right? Like we've had multiple clients and everyone, and so while one of them just either crashes and fails to sync up, or kind of forks off, which is called a consensus bug, and goes in their own little parallel universe, which is disconnected from reality. And this kind of gets fixed in a matter of hours, days, maybe, and then kind of life moves on. And this is what has allowed Ethereum to have 100% uptime for the last 10 years, and I'm hoping that the diversity of ZK-VMs can give us similar liveness. Now, eventually, if you're willing to project yourself maybe 5 years into the future, there's an alternative way forward, which is to lean on formal verification. So we could potentially just have one canonical ZK-VM and proof system and just formally verify end-to-end the whole stack and have extremely high confidence that there are 0 bugs. We actually have started a formal verification effort. So we have a $20 million program that is led by a chap called Alex Hicks. And the URL is verified-zkvm.org, or the other way around, zkvm-verify.org. And we're basically giving out grants to build infrastructure that will allow us to do this end-to-end formal verification. And there's a lot of reasons to be bullish because, for example, AI can help us with a lot of the grunt work of formal verification. And the reason is that with formal verification, it's black and white. Either you've managed to prove this lemma or this theorem, or you haven't been able to prove it. And so there's kind of this opportunity for very tight loops that allow for reinforcement learning for the AIs. In any case, that's a whole rabbit hole. But long story short is, no, I'm not too worried about the soundness bugs of ZK-VMs. Now, there is another issue that people are worried about, and I kind of want to express it, which is that when we increase the gas limit radically, how do we guarantee censorship resistance? So today, the way that we guarantee censorship resistance is with altruistic proposers who are willing to build blocks locally from the publicly available mempool. And the reason why it's altruistic and not rational is because the blocks that they build are actually not as valuable as the blocks that they would have otherwise gotten from the professional block builders. So they're willing to take a little bit of a cut in their profits in order to basically make sure that all transactions in the mempool that they've seen get included. This potentially starts to break down with very high gas limits because it becomes much more difficult to build these blocks locally on a Raspberry Pi. And so we have this proposal, which is actually fairly advanced. We've done all the research. We have an EIP. It's called Fossil, and the idea here is to introduce what I call inclusion lists. So it's a list of transactions, just like a block, but instead of being ordered, they're unordered. And and basically it's a constraint on the next block builder and proposer to include those transactions in any order that they want, but they have to be included. So if there's transactions sitting in the mempool that for whatever reason are not being included on chain, any validator can just include them in the inclusion list. This is a very unsophisticated action, and that will guarantee the censorship resistance.
Got it. Okay, interesting. And you see those as kind of the two main, like people talk about, okay, are the ZK-VMs going to have bugs? And then this kind of altruistic block proposing mechanism as well to solve the other problem.
Yeah, exactly. So today we rely on altruistic block proposing, and in the future we'll rely on altruistic inclusion list proposing. So it's a different type of proposing, which is much less sophisticated. It's in a sense it's altruistic because someone has to do a little bit of work and they don't get compensated, but the amount of work they have to do is essentially zero. And so what I expect will happen in practice is that by default, the configuration of the nodes would be to be an includer, and there would just be a task that happens in the background, and the operator doesn't even realize that it's happening. But if for whatever reason you want to not be an includer, then there would be a command line flag for you to opt out.
Got it. Okay, interesting. Where do you see, I guess, in terms of upgrades, EIPs? Fusaka had a few ZK proving related EIPs. How close is the current implementation of Ethereum to being able to handle the 2027 vision of ZK-VMs?
Right. So actually, ironically, like one of the difficulties of the 2027 vision is inclusion lists. And the reason is that the includers can include on chain what we call prover killers. So these are transactions for which it's very difficult to produce a proof. It's not something that a rational block builder would include in their blocks because they're responsible for the block proving, and so they'd be DOSing themselves. But if someone forces the inclusion of that transaction through an inclusion list, well, someone has to prove it. And so what we really need to solve for this 2027 vision is are the prover killers. Now, today, what you can do is you can have a transaction that consumes all 45 million gas in the block. So it's like a monster transaction that just by its sheer size, it kind of qualifies it most likely as a killer. You can't easily break it down and parallelize it. And so one of the EAPs in Fusaka puts a gas limit per transaction at 16 million gas. So that's already a massive step forward. And then one of the other issues with the prover killers is that there's some opcodes that are just harder to digest by the ZK-VMs. And in particular, the one opcode called the modular exponentiation opcode, where the ratio of proving effort to gas cost is very, very high. So the way that we fix that is very easy. We can just increase the gas cost per usage of the modex, and that largely solves the issue. But what we need to do, and this is something that we're hoping to do in the fork after Fusaka, in the G fork called Amsterdam, is to kind of review all of the opcodes and kind of try and reprice as many as possible, so that we shrink the delta between the average case proving and the worst case proving.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. So that doesn't sound like there's too much that, repricing opcodes is not a huge lift.
Yeah. Historically, most of the lift has been on the ZK-VMs, just to get to this point where you have real-time proving under 10 kilowatts. That has been just an absolute monster effort. And it's happened much faster than most people expected. But once we're there and we reach parity with mainnet, I think the bottleneck will no longer be the ZK-VMs. And the reason is that ZK-VM technology improves much, much faster than 3x per year. It's closer to like 5x per year or 8x or even 10x per year. And so like the traditional engineering bottlenecks around databases and networking, that's going to be the actual bottleneck. And the good news is that many other chains are solving these bottlenecks, right? So we have many performance L1s like Monad, that will be launching soon. They've done a bunch of engineering work to address these bottlenecks. Same thing for Say, and the L2s like Mega ETH and whatnot have put a lot of performance engineering. So I think we'll be able to borrow a lot of this engineering, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that the 3x per year is like the right target, in the sense that it's doable, and it's also not easy, in the sense that we're going to have to put a real effort to achieve it.
Yeah, makes sense. In terms of, Sherlock just hosted the $2 million Fusaka audit contest, looking at all the execution layer, consensus layer clients. Tons of researchers. Yeah, I think it was over 400 researchers participated. It's not, Solidity code, so it's not the easiest code to look into for a lot of researchers. Mm-hmm. What advice would you have for researchers who want to continue to contribute, their skills to Ethereum? Do you think they should be studying ZK-VMs? Do you think they should be studying something else? Like, what are the main security areas? Formal verification?
Yeah. It depends on your time frame. So if you're young, and you want to, take a little bit of a risk, and you're willing to go through this learning process, then I would probably recommend at least looking at formal verification. Previously, formal verification was just bottlenecked on it being way too laborious and expensive in terms of man hours. And you needed a lot of skills, and the tools were absolutely terrible. I think now we're reaching a point, especially with this framework called LeanVM. So that's a formal verification framework, where you can start plugging in the AIs, and you can also start doing what's called collaborative proving, where you have this big system that you're trying to prove, and you break it down into modules, and people who mutually don't trust each other can start proving these modules, because you literally have a mathematical proof that this module is valid, and so you can just trust the proof. And there's this really inspiring effort called MathLib in Lean4, where they're trying to basically prove mathematics, like all of university level mathematics. And they're breaking down theorems into smaller lemmas, and there's almost like Wikipedia style open collaboration where anyone can chip in. I think with especially with AI, those researchers that can make use of it as a productive tool will distinguish themselves. Now, in the very short term, there's an opportunity to try and find bugs, of course, in the consensus and execution layer clients. One thing that I would suggest looking into are some of the new clients. So one that comes to mind immediately is Ethrex. This is a new execution layer client. It's kind of a breath of fresh air from my perspective, because they're looking for performance from day one. It's written in Rust, and also because it's kind of a new team that kind of adds to the richness of the Ethereum culture. And because they're so new, I'm sure there's a bunch of bugs, and so I think that could be a good client to look into. I guess another thing that is in the back of my mind as well is, and I'm a little shocked that it hasn't, that the Rollup, basically, I think that the Rollups are a little bit of a ticking time bomb, in the sense that I think all of them have critical vulnerabilities. And especially as we start to remove the training wheels, and we start to have more real decentralization, we're going to want to protect these Rollups fundamentally. So, the vision of a Rollup is that it's secured by these proof systems, either fraud-proof games or snarks. But in practice, that's not how they're secured. In practice, they're secured by the centralized sequencer that will basically only build honest blocks with transactions that don't try and exploit the system. And they're also secured by security councils that, whenever there's a bug that's found, it's fixed through that. And also there's this concept of settlement delay, which is that there's a delay between when the transactions go on chain and when the action of those transactions materializes on the L1 through settlement. And so you have a window of time where you can act if you detect this bug. What's going to happen over time is that we're going to shrink the settlement delay. That's going to help with composability, but it's going to mean that you can't rely on this. And the sequencers increasingly, I think, are going to become decentralized. And so any actor can permissionlessly insert these malicious transactions. And then we're going to have to really be secured by these proof systems. And there we're going to want to make sure that these proof systems are not buggy.
Got it. So paying attention to the rollups. Obviously, you talked earlier about maybe learning formal verification, Lean 4, which is really interesting. I actually have a follow-up question on that. One of the difficult pieces of formal verification is the amount of man hours and just the difficulty of setting it all up. Another one is when code bases get extremely complex, like mathematically proving them, becomes infinite, I guess. How do you think, and you talk a little bit about modules, so maybe that's how you're thinking about it, but I assume these code bases are going to be quite large. So how can you formally verify them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would actually recommend bringing in Alex Hicks to the show, because he's amazing. And he leads this formal verification effort, and he has a lot of insights to share. But one of the things that Alex is trying to achieve, which is ambitious but doable, is basically have formal verification be baked in from day one in your tooling, so that when you write code, in parallel, you kind of have the formal verification happen. That, as your code base grows, or every time there's a change, then it's almost like CI. It just runs in the background, and that requires a little bit of a deeper integration into compilers. For example, so your compiler, in addition to producing the binary, will also produce a Lean 4 proof. So that's one approach. Another thing that I want to highlight is that there's a new formal verification tool that only checks half of or one out of two classes of bugs. So in ZK, there's two classes of bugs. There's what we call soundness issues, which basically allows you to prove incorrect statements, and then there's completeness issues, for which it's impossible to generate a proof for a valid statement. And we have this tool which allows us to verify the first class of bugs. And in practice, most of them are in this first class, where you have, for example, an under-constrained circuit where you're meant to check something, but your circuit doesn't actually check it. And the much harder type of work, which is the completeness, thankfully doesn't happen nearly as often in practice. And here you would need to use the traditional Lean 4 formal verification as opposed to this new tool. Now, unfortunately, this new tool, the name of this new tool escapes me. So I guess we can include it in the show notes, and I'll let you know after the show.
Sounds good. One of the other areas that you've said you've spent time on in the past is the economic security side of Ethereum. And I know you guys had a recent AMA, and I think this was the top question, or the most upvoted question, was around paying for economic security. And you had an interesting take that, once you get above 50% or more of ETH being staked for economic security of Ethereum, you're actually overpaying for economic security potentially if you have, emissions going to above 50%. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the very important security metrics that we have is total value secured divided by total value securing the network. Now, the total value secured, as we discussed at the beginning of this podcast, is about $1 trillion. And the total value securing, meaning the total amount of ETH staked, is today about $100 billion. So the ratio between the two is about 10x. And this is a plenty healthy ratio. And part of the reason here is that if you put yourself in the shoes of an attacker, a 51% attacker, that's trying, for example, to either cause a liveness failure with censorship, or try and rewrite history with an invalid, an inconsistent finalized block, then how much value can they extract from the system? And my vague intuition is that it's actually on the order of like 1% of the total value secured. And the reason is that the exchanges have all sorts of protections, and there's all sorts of legal ramifications. And like if you were to censor, for example, liquidations, then like maybe you could get off by scraping a few dollars here and there. But in general, like 1% is kind of what I have in mind. And so you want to make sure that your security ratio doesn't go above 100x, because then if it goes above 100x, then now there's an incentive for the attacker to actually perform the attack, because they gain more from what they stand to lose by getting slashed. What is the effect of the difference between 100% staked and 50% staked? That only changes the security ratio by a factor of 2. So it kind of has marginal impact on the security ratio. But going from 1% staked to 50% staked, that there's an enormous difference there. It's like a 50x difference. Or even between 10% and 50%, that's like a 5x difference. That is a meaningful difference. Now, my mental model is that Ethereum is going to gobble up all of finance, and it's going to be securing, let's say, $100 trillion. And so we want to make sure that the economic security is at least 1% of that, so at least $1 trillion. And I think it's going to be very easy to achieve that kind of economic security with 50% or less of all ETH staked. And so if you agree with that premise, then we shouldn't be paying for more economic security than we need, because there is a real cost to having economic security. It's not free. Like, you should think of economic security as being the equivalent of an army for a nation state. Like, you have to pay like these salaries on a constant basis, and not only do you have to pay a salary, but there's an opportunity cost, right? Because you have all of these citizens that are in the army when they could be doing other stuff. Like, they could be programmers or bakers or taxi drivers or whatever society needs. And so when you cap the amount of ETH staked, then you can dramatically reduce the issuance, which is basically the security budget that goes to pay for the army. And maybe we can cut it down by a tremendous amount, maybe 10x. The other thing that you do is that you have more pristine ETH that can be used in DeFi, for example, without all of the complications and costs that come with LSTs, liquid staked tokens, where basically you have this contraption where you're introducing smart contract risk, you're introducing governance risk, you're introducing custodial risk, because you have third-party operators staking on your behalf, and what if there's an error and they get slashed, or a hack happens or whatever. And so and the other kind of consideration is that if there's too much LSTs, then you're in a position where the unit of account, the default unit of account, might shift away from ETH to something else. And so the monetary premium associated with ETH as the asset by losing this unit of account might be, the loss of monetary premium might be quite significant. So a lot of people at least within the Ethereum Foundation and a reasonably large subset of the community, believe that 50% is way more than enough. And actually, many people would advocate for less, for let's say 25% or 33%. But we've already reached a point where about 30% of all ETH is staked, and so I think the socially palatable solution is just to cap at 50%, and 50% is one half. It's a very kind of neutral number, and I'm hoping that we see the rise of a champion who can navigate this very socially complex question of changing the issuance curve. But I'm hopeful it can be done, and I think the rewards will be enormous for Ethereum.
Got it. Yeah, a lot of different players with a lot of different incentives going on in that conversation, I imagine.
Yeah, it's basically, just to sum it up, it's the whole Ethereum ecosystem versus what I call the nominal yield enjoyers. So if you're some sort of an entity that charges a fee based on the nominal yield, meaning like the sticker number of staking. So for example, today it's about 2% from issuance. If your livelihood depends on this 2%, then you're kind of against the issuance change. But everyone else in the ecosystem is for it. And the reason why I mentioned nominal yield is because there's this other concept called real yield. So the stakers, as rational entities, they shouldn't be caring about nominal yield. They should really only be caring about nominal yield. They should only be caring about real yield. And what is the real yield? It's the nominal yield adjusted for inflation. At the very least, you can also adjust it for the cost of staking and taxes and things like that. But at the minimum, adjusting it for inflation. And the extreme scenario is if everyone is staking, right? Let's say everyone's staking, everyone's making, let's say, the 2%. Well, no one's making 2%, right? Like the real yield is zero. And actually, once you adjust it for taxes and costs, everyone's losing money because they have to pay taxes on nominal yield. So the taxman, for example, is what I would call a nominal yield enjoyer. And so they would be against such a hard fork. But hopefully, they don't have too much of an impact. But various staking operators are also nominal yield enjoyers, and so that's what makes it socially difficult.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept, having 100% staked. No one's earning real yield at all. Having 50% staked. Now some people are earning real yield because the others who are just holding ETH are not benefiting. Yeah, it's very interesting. You talked a couple months ago about how Bitcoin is not in a great position in terms of 51% attack. I think you said it's only a matter of time until Bitcoin has a 51% attack. What's what's the summarized version of why you think Bitcoin is in trouble there?
Yeah, so the summarized version is basically the exact same analysis that we did for Ethereum. So we need to look at the total value secured, which is about $2 trillion, and you need to look at the total value securing Bitcoin, which is about $10 billion. And so the security ratio is 200x, which is, like, in my opinion, just way too high as it is today. But what is going to happen is that with every successive halving, every 4 years, the security ratio is going to increase, close to 2x. And the reason is that there's almost no fees. So the transaction fees make up for less than 1% of all of the income. Actually, it's less than 128. So even after seven halvings, we would still be in a position where the fees don't make up the bulk of the issuance of the minor rewards. And so what I expect will happen is that within the next few years, a rational actor will just attempt a 51% attack. And so what do they need to do? They basically need to buy a sufficient amount of mining rigs. They need to set up all of the data centers, including the power supply and the cooling, and then they need to execute their 51% attack. And one of the actually interesting things to look at is the amount of open interest on the perp markets. So the perp markets is like this derivatives side of things where you can basically short Bitcoin in size. And today, if you look at the aggregate open interest on these perp markets, is about $35 billion. So there's like today $35 billion of notional short on Bitcoin, and it only costs $10 billion to attack. And so it's someone who has a lot of capital, let's say tens of billions of dollars, let's say 20 billion or maybe 25 billion, they could take $15 billion, use that as collateral to short Bitcoin, and then use the other $10 billion to go attack Bitcoin. And if they're able to like severely disrupt the system, then they would end up profiting. Now, there's another kind of way to profit from 51% attack in Bitcoin, which is to drain BitVM bridges. So there's this recent trend called BitVM, where you can basically build optimistic rollups on top of Bitcoin. And the problem with optimistic rollups is that they're basically they incentivize 51% attacks. And the reason is that if you can censor the chain for a sufficiently long period of time, for example, 7 days, then you can prevent fraud proofs from entering the chain, and then you can drain the BitVM bridges. And it's possible that we're going to see more than $10 billion of BTC in BitVM bridges, within the next 2-3 years. At that point, an attacker has like a very low risk attack that they can perform, which is that they can short the notional value in the BitVM bridges, steal all of the BitVM, and be delta neutral, so that they kind of they secure all of the value in the bit. So let's take an example. Let's say there's $20 billion in the BitVM bridges. I'm going to go $20 billion short. And so now, whatever the price of Bitcoin is, if it goes up or down, it doesn't matter. I've stolen the $20 billion. I've $20 billion, and going back again to the cost of attack only being $10 billion. But in 2 years' time, we're going to have the halving, and the cost of attacking Bitcoin might be higher or lower than 10 billion. But the long-term trend is clear that there's basically no fees, and so every 4 years the security ratio goes up.
Got it. And that 10 billion cost to attack, that's like you've made some calculation of mining rigs.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at order of magnitude, so we have 1 billion terahashes per second. That's the hash rate that's publicly available information, and 1 terahash per second is about $10, right? So you do 1 billion times $10, that's $10 billion. Now, where does the $10 come from? About kind of $7-8 of that is the mining rig, and then like $2 or $3 of that is the data center, plus the cooling and all of the electrical equipment. So all of the transformers and the cabling and everything that's associated with that. And yeah, that's how you get to these numbers. And it's interesting because we've reached a point where it's all of the numbers are almost powers of 10. So the hash rate is 1 billion terahashes per second. The cost per terahash per second is about $10. The power draw is about 10 joules per terahash, and so you can also calculate the total power draw that you would have. So it would be 10 gigawatts. Now, 10 gigawatts is a lot of energy, right? So part of the engineering challenge is to get access to all of this data center capacity. But there was this kind of interesting statistic, which is that the Chinese government, or the China, the country, in 2024 set up something like 200 gigawatts just of solar energy. So like one single country in like one very specific type of energy deployed 20x in single year the amount of power necessary to 51% attack Bitcoin. So I wouldn't be surprised if actually China itself does the 51% attack. Partly because, like, technically speaking, it's trivial for them to do it, and the cost is negligible for them. And you need to ask yourself, okay, what are the incentives at play? Well, China has, in my opinion, is what I call like structurally, socially short Bitcoin, meaning that within the Chinese society, it is either illegal or frowned upon to be owning or being active in the blockchain space. So mining is severely restricted. Buying and owning crypto is severely restricted. Working in the crypto industry is also restricted, and the media is also restricted from talking about it. And so, if Bitcoin were to do well, then that's actually like net negative for China, which is like structurally short. And so I could see them being highly incentivized to 50% attack Bitcoin. And you know the old adage, which is like, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcomes. And my personal prediction is that within the next 10 years, China or some other entity will be 51% attacking Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, deploying 20x the amount of power required in a short period of time is, a striking statistic. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Another statistic is like, what is the total power generation in the whole world? It's about 5,000 gigawatts. So, it's about 500 times more than what it takes to attack Bitcoin. So, yes, like if you're a single entity within a single jurisdiction, getting 10 gigawatts is very hard. But if you were to spread it out a little bit, then it should be totally doable.
Yeah. I guess kind of a related question. You said you were working on, post-quantum. I don't know if it was post-quantum cryptography or just what we do post-quantum world. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And, when do you think quantum computers can break algorithms like ECDSA?
Yeah, so just a couple of weeks ago, the Ethereum Foundation organized a workshop in Cambridge on post-quantum computing. We had 50 people from all around the world come for 3 whole days. And in the closing dinner, we actually invited this local Cambridge entrepreneur. So he founded a company called Riverlane. They specialize in quantum error correction, and they have 120 employees, and they recently raised $100 million. And this guy has been in quantum for a very, very long time. And he founded his company 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, his date was 2032 for the date when quantum computers would break crypto. And he kind of used, the exponential improvement to the gate fidelities and the number of qubits to kind of try and guesstimate his date. And in 2025, 2032 is still his date, right? Like which is scary. And there's like all of these studies which will pull various experts and draw the distribution of estimates. And very roughly speaking, is kind of a bell curve. And the median is like somewhere in 2030, in the 2030s. And so, I don't have like special insights here. I'm just kind of parroting what the experts say, but like, I think it's reasonable that within the next 10 years, let's say, there's at least a single digit percentage chance that we will see quantum computers breaking cryptography. And, how the goal, right, over the next 10 years is to have tens of trillions of dollars secured by these blockchains. Even like a 2% chance, is kind of really bad, let alone a 10 or 20 or 50% chance. And so we have no choice but to start investing research resources in post-quantum computing and in post-quantum cryptography. And one of the big challenges is the size of the signatures. So if you look at an ECDSA signature, it's less than 100 bytes. But if you look at the post-quantum signatures, they're greater than 1 kilobyte. So the delta between the two is at least 10x. What will happen if we were to just put these signatures on chain is that the total throughput of the chain in terms of TPS would go down by roughly a factor of 10. So Bitcoin would go from 3 transactions per second to 0.3 transactions per second. And Ethereum L1 would go from whatever it is, right now it's 30 transactions down to 3. And it's just completely unacceptable. And so the hard technical challenge, which essentially no one else is trying to solve, is what we call signature aggregation, where you can take many of these large signatures and compress them into a short aggregate signature. And the technology that we're using here is a snark. So you can take as many signatures as you want, and you prove in a snark that you know that you have knowledge of all of these signatures. And now you don't have to put the signatures on chain, you just put this very short proof and you're done. But in the context of Ethereum, we want to make sure that there's like literally 0 bugs, right? Because we would have an enshrined proof system, and any bug would be absolutely catastrophic. So we're putting a lot of effort in security. And so this is why it will take many years, on the ballpark of 4 years before the time is right to incorporate this technology on Ethereum L1. And what I expect will happen is that this migration to post-quantum cryptography is so invasive for the consensus layer that we might as well bundle with it a bunch of other improvements, because we're going to be refactoring and rewriting a very large subset, let's say 80% of the consensus layer. And so this is why I've introduced this meme called the Lean Ethereum meme, or the Lean consensus, where we have an opportunity to incorporate all of the research ideas that have been accumulating for the last 10 years, but we haven't had the bandwidth to incorporate them because we're bottlenecked by partly the technical debt that we've accumulated over all these 10 years, but also by the fact that the governance infrastructure that we have, only allows for a very small number of forks per year, maybe 1 fork per year, or a little bit more, maybe 1.5 or 2 forks per year. And each of these forks, have to be reasonably small because we don't want to break what we currently have. And so we kind of move extremely cautiously. And so what is happening in parallel to these small incremental forks is this much more ambitious, but also much longer term effort called Lean Ethereum, which hopefully will improve by at least a factor of 10x the consensus layer that we have. And some of the improvements that I'm hoping we can bundle with post-quantum cryptography include faster finality. So finality in a matter of a few slots, maybe 2 slots, 3 slots. I'm also hoping that we can significantly reduce the slot durations to 4 seconds, maybe even more aggressively to 2 seconds. There's also this idea that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast called APS, Attested Proposal Separation, which is a way to make sure that all of the downsides of the MEV pipeline are segregated away from the consensus participants so that we can have best-in-class decentralization. But I'm just generally speaking, I'm also hoping that we can clean up a lot of the technical debt and embrace a new generation of technology. So the other big thing that I'm hoping we can do with Lean Ethereum is from day one, have the ability to fully snarkify the whole chain, so that you can have, for example, a fully validating node in your phone, or in your browser tab. So instead of your wallet connecting through Infura and you're trusting Infura, you can just verify the mathematics, and this would unlock a much more ideologically driven kind of cyberpunk future that we all want to see, but hasn't materialized yet because of technological barriers.
Wow. So did I hear you right? And you basically said, if this quantum, progression continues, we're going to need to rewrite 80% of the consensus layer code in the next 4 years or so?
Yeah, that's right. Because the BLS signatures that I mentioned previously, they're so deeply ingrained in the way we do things that removing them just means completely replacing them. And another similar situation is actually what we call the data layer. So Ethereum L1 has 3 layers: consensus layer, data layer, execution layer. And it's easy to remember because it's CDE, consensus, data, execution. And the data layer is what we also call the blobs. And the way that the blobs are structured is using this cryptography called KZG, which it actually happens to be the same cryptography as BLS. It uses pairings, and is also completely vulnerable. And here it's kind of easy to see that if we remove KZG, then it's just essentially 100% rewrite of the data layer. And so, yeah, we have a lot of work to do, but we've made so much progress over the last year with what is known as hash-based cryptography. So it's a subset of cryptography that builds all of its primitives, all of its schemes just using hash functions. And hash functions are robust against quantum computers. And so we're building hash-based signatures and hash-based snarks. And then when you combine these two, you get a hash-based aggregatable signature scheme. And we can reuse the technology to have hash-based erasure coding for the data layer. And we can also have a hash-based ZK-EVM for the execution layer. So in some sense, LeanVM is all about bringing this new exotic sci-fi cryptography called hash-based snarks and pushing Ethereum to the next level, both on what you said, which was the beast mode, increasing the throughput by 100x, hopefully 500x, but also fort mode, which is having a blockchain which is so secure that nothing can break it. Not a nation state, not a quantum computer, not Elon Musk, not even like a syndicate of multiple powerful countries could take down Ethereum. That is at least the dream that we have.
Yeah. No, very cool. One kind of almost fun question I wanted to ask you around that. Ethereum's had 10 years of 100% uptime basically, and beast mode is all about getting to 1 gigagas per second over the next 6 years or so. Would you sacrifice 24 hours of unscheduled downtime in order to have 1 gigagas per second throughput in a month?
That is a very tough question. I guess it's not for me to answer this question. If it were to be an option, it would be for the broader community. So I mean, that's a little bit of a cop-out. But I guess another possible answer is that we have the technology and we have the roadmap to get us to where we want to be in a few years. In the grand scheme of things, it is going to happen in the blip, right? Like getting to 1 gigagas per second is going to be almost instant. And the reason I say that is because I'm envisioning Ethereum living for at least a century, maybe multiple centuries. And so 5 years in the grand scheme of things is nothing. And this is one of the things that that frustrates me a little bit, is that the current thinking and governance that we have gives a lot of weight to the first 10 years of Ethereum history, right? Like there's a lot of attention to all of the technical debt that we've accumulated and being like perfectly backwards compatible. And but really, in my opinion, we should be focusing on the next 100 years. And that's much more important, right? In the last 10 years, well, right now we only have $1 trillion of value that we're securing, but 100 years we'll have much more than that. And so I think we should be future oriented as opposed to being present or past oriented. And so, yeah, if you take that philosophy, it's kind of okay to do things properly and not take shortcuts with downtime. And there's a lot of lindiness and a lot of reputation that compounds every single day that we don't have downtime. So I would rather kind of, especially in this day and age where there's still competition on monetary premium, right? There's two assets. There's BTC, the asset, and ETH, the asset, that are competing to become money for the internet. Bitcoin is a little bit of a piece of crap technologically, right? Like it's nowhere near 1 gigagas. It's like the extreme opposite end of it's like 3 transactions per second, and still it has won the monetary premium war. And I think if we want to win this monetary premium war, then we need to be valuing things like uptime. While the war hasn't been settled, I would lean towards maximum uptime. But I'm fairly confident that Ethereum will win the monetary premium war, soon enough. Maybe next year, maybe the year after that. We'll have a flippening, and then we can move on and potentially be slightly more aggressive.
Got it. Yeah, very, very interesting. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I'd love to try to get 2 more questions in. The first one is just, what advice would you have for someone who wants to be in a role like yours? Being a prominent researcher at a large blockchain or even just a large, technology project. What advice would you have for someone who's much younger and trying to be, in that type of role?
Yeah. First of all, I would encourage you to reach out. So just like I reached out to Vitalik, like you can reach out to me. I have open DMs on Twitter. I'm very easy to access on Telegram and various other platforms. You can email me. I've helped onboard many people at the Ethereum Foundation. Something like 30 people over the 8 years that I've been there. And so if there's someone who's really exceptional and wants to do this public goods work, focus on DR1, and you're like passionate about the cryptography or the economics or the coordination work or whatever it is, then just come chat with us. Oftentimes, the way that we onboard people is for them to prove themselves, in the sense that they start making contributions on open source repos. They start participating in discussions. The Oracle devs are open to anyone to attend. The Discord channels are all open for people to attend. A lot of the Telegram groups, you can be invited. What we do is very transparent. Just attending the call. So, for example, I organize the ETH proof calls. We're gonna have ETH proof call number 6 on November 7th. You can get a calendar invite for that. I also organize the Lean Ethereum calls. In the past, I've also organized the Ethereum sequencing calls. Just showing up is already puts you in the the 1% of people that show that they're truly interested in this, and then above and beyond just showing up, kind of showing that you're able to make a big impact technically, and then beyond the technology, it's also important to be a good team member. Right, because a lot of what we do is wide scale collaboration with many different teams. So Lean Ethereum is all about working with all of the consensus layer clients, the execution layer clients, the DevOps team, the security team, the speccing team, the cryptography team, the economics team. There's like hundreds of people involved in like shipping this. We're essentially building a rocket, if you will, and so your ability to work well with others, especially in this chaotic environment where everyone's working from home and there's no clear hierarchy, is just as important as the technology.
Got it. And I guess last thing, what do you see as obviously you're working on Lean Ethereum, you're working on ETH proofs. What do you see as the exciting things coming up in the next few months for you and for Ethereum?
I mentioned this demo that I'm hoping to do on the 22nd of November at ETH Proofs Day. Hopefully you'll come to Argentina. That's one way to show up, is just to come to the conferences and say hi. Make sure to register for ETH Proofs Day. We already have basically a queuing system because we're already oversubscribed. But do register if you are in Argentina. I guess another thing that I'm excited about is the development of what we call LeanVM, which is this minimal ZK-VM specialized for cryptography. So for the aggregation of signatures and the recursive aggregation of proofs. There's a couple of things I'm excited about. One is just the technology maturing. For example, we have what we call this proximity prize. So these hash-based NOCs, more often than not, rely on this open conjecture about polynomials called the proximity gaps conjecture. And the Ethereum Foundation has announced a $1 million prize to prove it. It's kind of similar to the Clay Millennium prizes. If you can solve it, it will have a really massive impact in our space. But the other thing that I'm quite excited about is people realizing that this LeanVM can be used for things other than just post-quantum cryptography. So one example, one use case that I'm super excited about is what I call privacy wormholes, which basically gives Ethereum L1 the same privacy capabilities as the Zcash or Tornado Cash. So the basic idea is that you have some ETH in an address, and you send it to an unspendable address. So basically, you burn it effectively, but from the point of view of the blockchain, it just looks like a normal transaction. And then what you can do is you can have a proof of burn with a snark and use that to mint ETH in a totally different address without disclosing what was the original burn address. And so it's effectively a Zcash or Tornado Cash style system at L1. And in order to deploy this in production, the technical challenge is to have a proof system with 0 bugs. So end-to-end formally verified proof system. And what is that other than what we're currently working on, Lean Ethereum, in another context of signature aggregation? So all of this technology will help the whole privacy story. And privacy, I think people are starting to realize is absolutely necessary for a very large subset of the population to start using Ethereum. A lot of the institutions just can't come in without strong privacy guarantees. And quite frankly, the vast majority of retail even can't come in. It would be disastrous if society was massively surveilled financially. The PSE, which is a cluster within the Ethereum Foundation, which previously stood for Privacy and Scaling Explorations, has been reorganized and renamed to Privacy Stewards for Ethereum. So they're focusing exclusively on privacy, and there's about 50 people there in that team that will be pushing the frontier. So if you're interested in privacy, do get in touch with Igor or Andy, who are leading that effort.
Awesome. Well, some super exciting stuff. And looking forward to seeing you and some others in Argentina.
I'm hoping to do my demo, from home. So I actually won't be traveling to Argentina. But the real reason why I'm not traveling to Argentina is because my wife is expecting a kid. But there will be many other people in Argentina. So it should be a really fun event. And I'll be doing this demo remotely.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to viewing the demo at the very least. Should be exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining, Justin. Really interesting conversation. And thanks again.